Oh, sorry, Richard, you're going to start.
Go ahead. Hi, and welcome to our latest Orleans Hangout. We are on number 8 now, I think. And this is a roadmap hangout where we'll hopefully hear from the core team about what's coming up in the next few releases of Orleans and what cool features we've got to look forward to. So I won't bore you with any more detail. I'll hand over to Sergey, who's got a presentation.
Thank you, Richard. Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. So I guess it's time for New Year resolutions, but we're not going to do that. The goal of this is to discuss what we see as the roadmap and what we've been hearing from the community and trying to incorporate that in this vision of the roadmap, to get feedback and sort of adjust as we go. That's why I explicitly mentioning it's not a 5-year plan. It's not something that's set in stone. Things keep changing. We're in the business where technologies change every few months. For example, nobody heard of Docker 2 years ago. Now people are talking about it as a standard. So I think it's foolish to try to have a 5-year plan. So this is just the vision and the plan as of right now, as we see things happening. And it's subject to change as new information comes in, new technologies come in, new ideas come in. So let's see. Here's a quick snapshot of where we're at. I took this screenshot yesterday. We marching at roughly around 70 merge pull requests per month, and it was curious. And there was this blog post that Julian pointed to at the link at the bottom, the analysis of I think 3 other repos, public repos. So we're doing really good. We're higher than most of the projects in terms of activity and velocity of changes, but also in the community involvement. I counted PRs from community members versus Microsoft employees, not necessarily members of the core team, just Microsoft employees total. .NET, and we're in the ballpark of kind of famous projects like TypeScript. VS Code is very popular. Chakra just got released. The only thing that trumps everything is core. So I think should feel pretty good about it.
Is Sergey getting up for everybody else or just me?
What?
Yeah, Sergey, you're coming in and out a little bit. Sometimes we can't hear you for a few seconds.
Yeah, it's kind of getting mute sometimes.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, you're okay now.
So another observation recently, we've been seeing bigger and bolder changes in pull requests from the community. And here's probably an incomplete list of recent major changes. Support for SQL is much more serious than the initial version was. Membership, we have several implementation of the membership storage providers. Ruben did this heroic heart transplant, I would call it, of CodeGen that is completely new now. Gutenberg drove telemetry consumers. They're still in the beginning in terms of integrating plugins, but it enabled all these plugins. And pluggable serializers, Carl from, I guess, MSN Apps team, he implemented Bond and support for pluggable serializers. I mean, DI, Attila pushed DI before going on vacation. And Dmitry did this elimination of grain state, which enables a lot of scenarios. So these are examples. So thank you all for these great contributions, major changes, not just bug fixes. So we can do more than that. Before we go into the plan, I wanted to reiterate the vision of Orleans, what are the tenets of the project that we've been communicating kind of from the beginning, from the start of the project, which surprisingly, or not surprisingly, they survive still. So the 2 tenets have been the developer productivity and scalability by default. So you want making distributed applications qualitatively simpler, not just the framework that does something, some part of the work, but something that changes how you look at building applications, how you look at how you enable developers that are successful at building single machine applications, how to make them successful in building distributed and then cloud scale applications. So less code, simple code, encapsulation of proven patterns. At the end of the day, for businesses, you get time to market much better. But also, I think for developers, we like to enjoy doing what we're doing and having good experience of building software. That's part of our expectation of developers. And scalability comes again from encapsulating proven patterns with no bottlenecks inherent in the model. The third tenet that got added about a year ago, or slightly more, is going open source, being open, flexible. For two main reasons. It's good to be open if you run something in production. You don't have time to go ask for a fix for a big company, so you won't be able to go and fix it yourself. But also, it allows for fast evolution because all those people in the community come up with ideas that the small development team would never have gotten to. So this we consider the tenets of the Orleans as a project. So why we're doing it? What are the Uber goals? So if we could shoot for the moon, it really comes down to we want Orleans to be a technology of choice for building scalable systems. So the vision is when people 5 years from now look at how the evolution of distributed systems happened, we want Orleans to be a major part of that story, that they realize virtual actors is a new way of building apps and thinking about building apps. But also there are reasons, not just the model. The fact that it's open, it's flexible, it can run anywhere you need it and the way you need, so you can twist the way you want for a particular application because nobody can anticipate all possible requirements. Through openness, we also want to get to the rich ecosystem of tooling, extensions, plugins, providers, all kinds of things that, again, you cannot build with decentralized waterfall development. So it needs to happen organically through multiplication of each other's effort. And of course, the core of it is community. So you have community of experts, the people that can always help each other, can build stuff, are available for hire if there is a project and people ready to consult or do some small or big project. So that's kind of where we want to be, why we're doing this. A few thoughts how we get there, and that's probably obvious, but I think it's worth restating the obvious. So we're doing kind of a few things in parallel. So we constantly try to refine, fix bugs, improve experience, improve error messages, everything, improve documentation as we find things that are confusing. So there is like constant noise, quote unquote, of that kind of do.
Oh, Sergey, I think you've gone again.
Sergey, you're in mute again.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah.
So I was talking about this stream of new features that happen through pull requests, issues, some needs for business. The challenge there is to avoid just creating a laundry list of features. So we want to reduce or keep cognitive overload from happening, keep the model simple so that we still have the benefits of a simple, easy to understand model. Then the next thing is a set of, we call them themes, where it's a set of features towards a certain goal, where it's a goal, for example, a core CLR compatibility. So there is a set of changes that need to happen. So we all agree on this being an important theme of development, and that happens, development toward that theme, or as part of the theme, happens in parallel with several other themes. Then, of course, there were refactoring. There are minor refactoring, like just refactoring code, but there are major refactoring feature or implementation of feature, redesign feature. So without those kind of changes, the code base can get stale or unhealthy. So we need to do that, and we shouldn't push back and say, no, we're not going to touch it because it's been working well. Well, nothing is sacred. All things are up for refactoring and improvement. Integration with other technologies are really important. So there are a lot of things that are happening in the open or in general in the industry, and there's no point in trying to do it all. So we better leverage storage technologies, consistency technologies, communication technologies as they become available and compatible with what we're trying to do. And then the last thing is big, bold bets, things that are kind of outside of the theme, things that just risky proposition, like geo distribution, transactions, and things like that. So we think that we need a combination of all of this, and it's certain good, healthy composition of all developments along all those lines for Orleans to continue to be a successful project. Okay, so now getting more concrete, what actually is happening, starting with the immediate plans, things that very clear that we're doing very soon. So the current thinking is that the next major release, we just changed the versioning scheme to more semantic version than before, 1.2.0. We want to tie it to availability of the Event Hub stream adapter. That's the code that's been running in 3.4.3 in production, but it was in the 3.4.3 code base, so we're refactoring, bringing it into GitHub. That's what Jason Bragg's been doing. So we think that around that point, once we achieve that milestone, we can just have a major release along with all the features that get in at that time. And hopefully we'll include things like request interceptors that enable a few other interesting things. The other thing that is happening as we speak, integration of geo-distribution code, that's primarily at the moment between Sebastian and Julian, of getting the code that was built in MSR over the course of the summer into production quality state and into our repo. Now, I mentioned what the notion of themes. So these are the high priority themes at the moment. So core CLR compatibility, a lot of the changes and improvements there, but also switching to the XUnit as a testing framework. As you see on PR activity, that's what is happening very actively. The other thing that I think is kind of obvious is deployment and cluster management. So Orleans is very open, so you can run it anywhere you want in any kind of cluster deployment technology you need. But we don't believe we're there yet in terms of ease of use. Even with Azure, people have issues sometimes first time trying to deploy and need to figure out a few things. So recently, I think there's people starting evaluating YAMS built by Big Par guys in Vancouver. That seems like a good improvement over Azure PaaS worker role for much faster deployment upgrade. That's one of the stories. But we don't believe there is a single story. There will never be single stories. People deploy in cloud, and some people want to use PaaS. Some people want to use Service Fabric. Containers is a very hot topic. Docker, Windows containers. So we need to figure out all these stories and have Orleans work very well in all of them. So again, you want to be able to run it anywhere you need and the way you need. So Attila started the DI effort, but obviously we're at the very beginning, just injecting grain classes. There is consensus that we need to be much more DI enabled in the runtime itself, but also for application code. There's work to to do there, and I think we're in full agreement that this is very important to do soon. Persistence is, I think, maybe a little bit less obvious, but the persistent model we have today is very simplistic. We save all the properties together, so that makes it difficult to update smaller pieces of large pieces of state or loading state on demand. We have the code base, relevant code base in 343, and Jason Bragg wrote it there, so he's in great position to kind of step back and suggest a much more robust model for persistence, including the code that work for, in this case, Azure storage, but similar code can be written for other storage technologies. So outside of the high priority themes, there is kind of like a laundry list of, we call them Pri 2, sort of second priority. They're really not second, they're just to distinguish them from high priority themes. They're listed in no particular order, but I think they should be all familiar to you. For, a couple of years at least, we've been talking about the built-in front end for Grain, so you don't need to have a client. You can talk HTTP directly to Silo. That can be done. Front ends can be auto-generated based on Grain interfaces and whatnot. There's been on and off discussions about broadcasting and group grains and explicit placement of grains per silo. Documentation, samples, of course, tutorials. Likewise, connecting to multiple clusters from a single front end has been on the list for quite some time, which boils down to eliminating statics. And there's a challenge there, how to keep the programming model easy so you don't have to specify for every grain reference which cluster it goes. So there is a design challenge there and a bit of an implementation challenge. So it's not straightforward. In discussions about grain references, identity, what does it mean? What's the identity? Is it the reference or primary key and type, and how to make it work best for grains, for providers? It's still an open question. There is an open issue for scalability of reminders. That's what I think Skype folks from London wrote sort of design notes. So it's waiting to be implemented. I think Richard threw together a dashboard for Orleans, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of need to have monitoring tools, dashboard, visualization for what's going on in Orleans cluster, and especially if we go to multi-cluster geo-distribution, that need will be even more profound to see what's going on in my global deployment. Yevhen did very good presentation on Orlinka, the last meetup, and I think it was a consensus that we need to borrow some ideas back, and he wanted to transfer some of those, a lot of that functionality back to Orleans, so he doesn't need to maintain that functionality. So it's a good win-win for everyone. I'll touch on versioning, even though it's a big story. It's a multifaceted story. There's versioning of code, upgrading code in production. We call it in-place upgrades. So when you can deploy V2 while you're running V1 and have no interruption in processing incoming requests. So there is design for that, but it hasn't been implemented yet. But then when we go to versioning of persistent state and versioning of messaging, there are some interesting challenges and opportunities to solve, as I guess we all understand. F# has been kind of in this interesting position where we sort of support it because it's .NET, but it's not native for F#. So F# people look at it and they want to use it differently. That's why Orlinka was attractive for F# developers. So again, we want to bring all the goodness and make Orleans as native for F# as they found Orlinka today. Test infrastructure, we just migrated the bulk of our tests to GitHub, which is the first step when they run them as the unit test or BVT test on the build, but there are other more robust testing approaches to test cluster deployments and how to do that, how to do it in the cloud, how to do it on the premises. There's work to do there. Streaming is another interesting topic. So we designed the streaming APIs, sort of talking with Bart, Desmet, and others to kind of build it as more or less future async RX API, which is good to be aligned with RX. But at the same time, we hear feedback that for certain scenarios and for some developers, this API is too complicated. They want something much simpler. So there is a question of designing a simplified API in parallel or refactoring the API. It's a big open question. Another thing that's been kind of on the list for quite some time is directory. So today directory is held in, grain directory held in memory in all of the silos. Each silo has a partition of a directory. And if the silo goes down, we lose this partition, which is not fatal for Orleans because those grains get deactivated and then reactivated with register. It's just inefficient. But it would be good not to incur that cost. We had directory replication code back 3 years ago, but we never got to really run it in production. That's why we didn't include it, and we removed it as we're going open source. So if there is a desire cycles to do that, to explore this question, it would be very interesting to do. So the last thing I guess wanted to list is kind of aspirations. They're not concrete work items yet, but I think there's a lot of interest in that. And the first one is kind of much more than the aspiration. Phil Bernstein, I don't know if everyone knows, but if you say transactions, then you think Jim Gray and Phil Bernstein. So Phil Bernstein's been working on this project for 2 years with a guy who has been a developer, Tamer, has been a developer in Azure. Now he's a developer somewhere else, but he's been doing as his side project, as his kind of moonlighting, we were joking, project of building support for ACID distributed transactions, cross-grain transactions in Orleans. And they have some very innovative ideas using that implementation. That's in the private repo. And Phil and Tamer are at the point of testing performance, which is very promising. So we hope to bring it in a few months. But because it's kind of in private repo, it's not visible to anybody yet. Everything else is really like things that we discuss, people want them, but there is no clear plan. Like code analysis, especially now we use Roslyn for code gen, analyzing application code and flagging things like blocking calls or tasks that are not being awaited or otherwise handled correctly. We believe for quite some time that would be a big boost, especially for novice developers in Orleans. Just flag them with wording, say, hey, this is the wrong way of using task, or this is the wrong way to doing a grain call or processing a grain call. I think, Richard, you've done some work with Node.js integration, some exploration at least, and other people have done the JavaScript work, and we had internship not the last summer, the summer before, of hosting JavaScript runtime within Grain. So there is a range of possibilities there, how to make Orleans work for JavaScript developers transparently with no need for maybe Orleans client to be explicitly used or something like that. A bit more speculative is integration with Java. So Bioware built Orbit, which is effectively a JVM clone of Orleans, which was a great validation of the value of virtual actor model. But imagine if those things could talk to each other, send messages over the same protocol, and you could deploy services in Java and C#, especially now as C#.NET go cross-plat. That'd be a very interesting possibility. I think Ruben's been talking about recently about looking at several options for networking and messaging, And we talked about this in the past too, that we have essentially custom code in Orleans that does socket connections, buffer pooling, messaging. If there is a mature third-party library that does all of that, we would happily remove code that is not needed anymore. And that code is more powerful, like supports TLS. That'd be another win. Similarly with serializers, again, it's speculative. So we generate serializers not because it's fun, but because that's more efficient and makes programmability much easier. So that you just write interfaces and classes and they work. If we can get out of that business or somehow finding the magic option, that'd be awesome. So we focus on something on core values of Orleans instead of solving problems that other people could have solved. Cross-platform messaging protocol, that's kind of related to Java, but also in general, opening Orleans messaging protocol to other clients that we can't even think about. I don't know, maybe somebody writes in Go and wants to invoke Grain and just sends whatever HTTP call with the payload, maybe in JSON, and gets result back. That would be cool. Rebalancing and intelligent resource management has been researched by us while we were in MSR for several years. We were very cautious because by doing the wrong thing, it's very easy to make things worse, like being too eager to rebalance, but that's still on the table. So if you, say, run 10 silos in production and add 10 more, your throughput doesn't double right away, so it takes some time for new activations of grains to be evenly distributed over time before you get all these gains. It would be nice to get the performance throughput gains much faster, especially when things get rebooted for patching and whatnot. I already touched on deployment, but we're still not at the push-button deployment where you just focus on writing code and then know that you push the button and the code will run anywhere you need, locally on the dev machine, on your on-premises deployment, or in the cloud. A lot of people are talking about Docker. That Docker is that kind of thing where we discuss options for building an Orleans Docker image, so you can just deploy an application image on top of it. Maybe that's one of the options to explore as part of that theme. Deployment. So that's what we had on the list, but obviously we missed things, and this meetup is intended to be two-way, to hear feedback, to get more ideas, and sort of build a roadmap together. So this is just to start a conversation.
Well, there's a very, very good list. There's some really exciting things to look forward to there, Sergey, and particularly, I think the opening up of the protocol. So, talking HTTP or other language or the other protocols to the silo, then that enables a whole load of the other things in that list, doesn't it? So that looks like a really interesting thing. So, lots there that I'm interested in. About other folks, are there any questions or any feedback?
I think you covered pretty much everything I've got on my list, and then a lot more.
Yeah, I'm just flicking through your Orleans Roadmap episode 1, Ruben, and I can't see much that's not included.
I think the only thing that I don't see included from Ruben's list is the broadcast grains and grain groups, right? The rest should all be there.
Yeah, I think they were right at the start, weren't they?
Thought I had.
Yeah, we still need to work out what they should look like. They were definitely there. They're at the start.
Okay.
That's a big question. We're talking with Gabby and everyone about how that should look and what they should do and how to make it so that they fit in with the rest of the Orleans model really nicely. So that's an ongoing discussion in 610, issue 610 about that. So if people have opinions, jump in.
Right. So that's kind of in the works already in the discussion. Maybe not in the implementation yet.
And then we can build Raft on Orleans for fun.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm halfway there.
Or integrate with console.
Yeah.
Leverage. So my biggest question is, what did we miss, like in terms of something important, something big, a theme or some area of effort? Because it's easy to overlook when it heads down and keep churning things and fixing things. It's easy to miss something when you don't step back.
I don't think you missed anything, Sergey. I think that's very comprehensive. I think we just need to figure out what, where the priorities are for people, and what's more important for Orleans, and where we should focus our efforts. Really, I think it's a huge menu, isn't there? And there's some things which are interdependent, and working out those dependencies between them is probably a good next step, isn't it? And figuring out a rough plan.
Yeah, prioritization. But also, did we talk about dependency injection and aligning more generally with what the ASP.NET 5, ASP.NET Core guys are building, so that our framework and their framework sort of, I guess, have the same sort of feel to them?
Yeah, it's on the list, and we chatted with Julian just the other day, and he was saying exactly the same words, that we shouldn't be inventing something, just follow what they already do. They already went through several iterations to get it right. Right, Julian?
Yeah, definitely. I was I remember a long time ago I was one of the people who didn't like the DI as it was implemented before, and I know that they went through several iterations. I haven't seen the latest one, but in every iteration, like, it got much and much better. Like, there's no reason why not to follow their lead there now.
And I think that was one of the things that I was trying to say, maybe didn't articulate well, that what we've been trying since the beginning, because we've always been a relatively small project, to focus on what we can do well, where we can deliver value, as opposed to like storage. Like, whenever we want to solve a storage problem, there's so many people looking at storage, even when we started. Like DI, right? That should be a solved problem, but we just leverage.
Yeah.
It's tempting to do something custom, but I think we should consciously stay away from solving problems that other people solve, even if we're only 95% happy how they do that.
Yeah, because in a large way, they sort of represent the larger .NET community, right? And the sort of idioms that everyone else is settling on. So if we can reduce the cognitive load there for people to use ASP.NET and then say, oh, I need a backend, or I need a middleware or something, and then just easily move all of their code over to Orleans as well, then amazing, right?
Yep, definitely.
I wonder, you mentioned Jason's code over in 343 about persistent v2. What does that entail, and what does that give us? Because you see that I talked about some new sort of persistence model, right, where I just said, hey, it would be cool if we had something like what ActorFX offered, and what Service Fabric sort of has, where we have reliable queues and reliable dictionaries and things like that. But I wonder if maybe 343 had different ideas about what they're doing.
I think those things are complementary, or they're kind of addressing different needs. What sort of specifically the Jason's ideas they're very obvious. So today, like, if you write to table store, we just write one row per grain, which has size limit and writes all columns and has some other limitations. But we could write to multiple rows, multiple tables. We could write one field if we just change that instead of updating the whole row. There are things like that, just kind of low-hanging fruits, how to do it much more robust. Like loading properties on demand. If you have a large state, today we load all of it when the grain activates. oftentimes there is no need to. There's some rarely used pieces of state that you just load when it's requested. Current model is too simplistic to support any of that.
Yeah.
And then what you're saying, I think it's more like integration with storage technologies that are available. So if they're reliable collections, it's good to tap into them and just save state there through the right provider model and API.
Yeah, a simple facade over existing things just to expose like a couple of data structures that scale well. Okay, that's interesting. So does 343 at the moment, are they using anything in production that's different to the model that we're used to?
Yeah, so it happens sort of historically. They went in production with Halo 4, pretty much all services on Orleans, before we even had a declarative persistence model in Orleans. So kind of naturally, they had a storage code written before there was even an opportunity to integrate with declarative persistence. But there is desire on their end to switch to declarative persistence for all the benefits that it may give a centralized provider model. So again, we have this opportunity for the win-win to have a better persistence model and the production quality implementation of it, at least for a table store or blob store.
If there's some way that we can get funding from inside of Microsoft to build something like that, that would be pretty cool. Like in 343 maybe?
Not sure about that. I mean, it's just out of the big release, there's a lot of things that are going on. I have a question. What people think about deployment? What's the? Like, I know, Ruben, you went through several iterations of deploying in production.
Yeah.
Gutenberg, you had a slightly different, or you tried to take a slightly different approach in terms of networking and role management, if I said it right. Like, what are people's thoughts about kind of deployment today and tomorrow? Like, things like YAMS, I see that there's a lot of active discussion right now. Like, is Docker on your radar? Like, in general, what's your feeling?
We tried to use Docker in the past, but in order to use that, we should move away from Azure by that time, because we didn't have yet Azure native support for Docker unless you are running Linux. And since we are fully Windows-based and Windows Server containers are not on production yet, I think we will stay away from Docker. We currently are deploying regular worker holes with one cloud service for the web API and another cloud service for the silos, and we suffer like everyone else by deploying it for just hitting publishing on Visual Studio or using VSO to make the publishing for us. I'm actually investigating the YAMS in order to see if it can help us with the deployment, and we actually received some requests from Microsoft account manager asking us to move it to Service Factory. I already talked with Ruben a few days ago. I don't know yet how will be the end, where we will finally move, but what I can say is that I received a lot of complaints about people talking that's a bit harder to make the deployment on different V networks. You already saw those discussion on Jita, and unless you know how to mess around with the Azure VNets in Azure Resource Manager, you are stuck on the regular deployment for, let's say, the cloud service contains both the web API and the silos. I think we can make this easier.
Do you think YAMS can make it much easier? Because that was my hope, that it's kind of compatible with PaaS.
Yes, I think YAMS. Today, someone asked how they can deploy the the web API front end and the silos on the same machine. And I thought, hey, we are actually doing this on YAMS. If you think that you have a single cloud service with several instances and you are using YAMS on that, maybe it behaves the same way as on Service Factory. So I throw away the web API instance of package over there and it is installed across the same cloud service, and maybe it will make things easier. However, people like us cannot rely on that because we have to have strict regulations that forbid us to deploy a front-end machine that's supposed to be on a DMZ behind the firewall and the back-end machines that are actually processing the credit card data. So I'm looking for a way to make things easier while respecting the regulations.
What I'd really like to, yeah, Sergey, what I'd really like to do is have Orleans expose a Git remote endpoint and then Git push my grains to the Orleans cluster.
Mm-hmm. That would be good.
We could totally do that with YAMS.
Really?
Actually, a good thing is when we move to the X project solution, the X project for the DNX or in .NET Core, if we push some code to Git and we call DNX build, for example, instead of having nuggets referenced on the project or physical DLLs, it can actually pull some code from some external repository, build it at the startup, and actually run it. So people will be able to, while starting their silos, to just get the latest or some specific version of that code, build it, and start the grains from that.
Let me ask you this. Do you think it's too crazy to think that we can have a standard drop of, say, Orleans 112 in blob store that the YAMS can be pointed to? That you pull Orleans 112, and then you push grains or pull from whatever place, and kind of like the Docker idea with Docker images.
Mm-hmm.
Would it work the same way, you think?
Yeah, we should talk with the YAMS guys, because as far as I saw on the documentation and some tests they made here, it just grabbed the files from the store, the bulk storage, and just run some binary file, some XA file. I don't know if we can do it with, let's say, like you said, building an image for Orleans, and it can download the dependencies and start from that. I don't know.
You can certainly have a virtual machine image, couldn't you, which you could have as a 1.2 stamped Orleans version, and you push your grains up. The problem is things like the storage account you want it to connect to, and things like this. There are going to be some settings and some specific bits that currently aren't at grain level, are they? They're at the kind of silo settings level. So there's some things to think about there. There's also the old plugin idea, which might still work, and you don't have to do much to Orleans to enable that, and that could always be an alternative option for deploying to cloud services.
The plugin, what plugin do you mean, Richard?
Do you remember ages ago I spiked out a plugin for a cloud services worker role? Where you,
SDK plugin.
So
yeah, a cloud services plugin. But they're kind of hacky in a way because it's not really supported to have plugins that third-party plugins. You've got to copy it into like a program files directory in order to get it to work.
That's right.
Yeah. And if Microsoft decides to just change their Azure SDK model, we are screwed.
Yeah.
I think maybe, I'm not 100% on this because I haven't played much with Azure's Resource Manager, but maybe what we need is like an ARM template that deploys YAMS, and then we can just deploy our stuff to YAMS, because deploying with YAMS is extremely easy and really fast. Like for me, deploying everything takes less than a minute here with all my changes, versus 15 to 20 for cloud services, and then I've got to do the VIP swap and everything. So it's a heck of a lot faster this way.
Yes, actually, we have some ERM templates here to deploy your silos that are tied to the Azure automation. So based on the load on your silos, we can the Azure automation workflow say, hey, you need to spin up another machine. So it starts a second machine based on those templates. You can actually do it with EMs and maybe share it as an Azure template on the marketplace. So you make things easier for people that are starting.
Yeah, that would be cool because as far as deploying a all-in silo on top of YAMS is concerned, it's really not much code, and especially once we've got .NET Core, it's going to have this the standard model of, hey, here's your program entry point, and silo.start. So everything comes down to blob storage.
I know maybe I'm too simplistic, but to me this is all the same story. I think, Ruben, you had on your list clone a new project or create a new project by just cloning something. So to me it's the same thing, like take a standard image and then put something on top, like one assembly. And again, whether it's YAMS, whether it's local, that's what I call push button deployment. Clone, push button, the same thing. So you have something very basic, like image of whether it's YAMS or Docker or Service Fabric, whatever it is, you just put your single assembly with application code and boom, you're ready. How you put it, whether you git push it or put it to storage, that sort of implementation detail.
Yeah, that's right. Well, what I was talking about there was actually more about the getting started project, but hey, here's how to use Orleans, and here's all the idiomatic ways to do things, and use dependency injection, stuff like that. But as far as deployment's concerned, it would be nice if we had a really simple standard cluster sort of setup of. I think YAMS is the best way to go for that because it just makes it easier, and maybe that's something which we really should look into with them because. As far as adoption of YAMS is concerned, it would be nice for them to just have like an ARM template where we can just get the latest version. And actually, that's a good point where Docker comes into it because it would be pretty easy to have a Docker container which contained YAMS, which we then just use YAMS for deployment. Because deploying Orleans into Docker, if you've got a big project, then you're going to probably have to do the entire project into a Docker image at once. And I know that Docker supports layering things, but I don't know if that would be fast. I mean, from my perspective, it's different because I've got this Australian internet, right? I've got 2 megabytes straw of upload, 2 megabit straw of upload to the rest of the world through our thin fiber cables that tether off there. So I'm concerned a lot more about what I upload than I think most people maybe.
Yes, even if we move to Coursera, I think it will not be so easy to, from the developer's perspective, to start. Hey, I need to create a new Docker image based on that template and start that. Especially if you are going to deploy it on Azure, the user will still have to manage VMs, etc. I think in Azure it will actually be, in my opinion, as much complex as if you are creating the Service Fabric cluster, for example. And about Service Fabric, I think it will only worth to move that to there if we leverage their features like the name resolution, the replicas, etc. And today, just hosting it as a stateless service, I can't see a benefit from that.
But maybe I don't see a contradiction here. So Ruben, you're concerned about upload. I think what you need to be uploading is pretty much like you 1 or 2 assemblies. Everything else should be standard, whether it's standard image for ARM, for Docker, or for YAMS. That should be already in Azure. You should not upload it from your computer. I mean, I've been trying to convince Azure back in 2011 to have Orleans role in Azure. As you can see, I failed to do that. So
not exactly. Not exactly. The template also, if you are creating an ARM template, it's just a bunch of JSON structure, and you can publish it on Azure. It's okay for you. But if you are making a Docker image, unless you have another Docker template that has the Orleans dependencies built in on that, you have to upload the files as well.
Yeah, I think that's what Hope Soma was going to look at. I'm not sure if he will have time to have base image, Docker image with just Orleans, the runtime with Silos, and then layered on top application image, which points to Orleans image as a dependency with just your assemblies. So he believes that's it. You upload just your application image. I don't know if that's close to reality or not.
I don't know.
Could be good, but the problem you'd actually probably run into realistically is that when Orleans bumps a version, then we have to bump the version of the Docker image. And the question is, how does that interoperate with our local project file in VS? Because then we've got one version referring to in VS and referring to a different Orleans version in the Docker file, right? So I don't know if that's a realistic or desirable thing to have. I think having a base image of something like YAMS is better, because we don't need to change YAMS between Orleans version. None of our code depends on it, right? It's just a couple of 4-line JSON files that say, hey, I launch Orleans.exe. And deploying Orleans silo itself is pretty cheap and pretty small. So I don't really have a problem with doing that every time, because especially with YAMS, I only upload what changes, which is why it's quick. If I go and change one line of code right now, all right, save that. Let's see how long it takes to deploy. Okay, building, still building. Pre-deployed in probably a couple of seconds. It's about done.
If it takes longer to build than to deploy, that's the winner.
Yeah, well, I've got it in debug mode, so it's uploading the PDBs, which takes longer. But I just changed the common library.
Yeah, especially if you are with running Chrome now
24
with
seconds.
the Hangout.
Yeah, so it's deployed now. So it's quick to deploy from to YAMS using differential upload. It's good. I don't think we need to improve upon that.
Okay, that's great. So what else should we touch on before time runs out?
Did we talk about, there's only one thing that maybe wasn't covered. Did we talk about this idea of simple reactive streams, where instead of grains returning just a task of T, they can return either iObservable of T or something like iasync observable or whatever it is, so that you can have much easier, more whimsical standing queries or stream processing. So for example, let's say that I want to get all chat messages which have my name mentioned in it, right? I can make a call into a grain and say, give me messages where they contain Ruben, and then I just subscribe to that result that I get back out of that. So I just make that call and subscribe, and I can start doing processing and create complex graph structures in a really simple manner without having to create stream consumers and whatever every time.
So the question I have, does this fit into simplified streaming API, or is that a separate thing? Like it seems very similar to SMS, except for the API to subscribe and
yeah, and that it's direct, and that streams are not named. They're anonymous, because it's just the return value of a function call. And the question then is, what happens when a silo goes down or the grain crashes? And the answer to that is that because we now know when a silo goes down, because of that code that dvulcan wrote, the client can just resubscribe to that same stream. So it keeps a copy of the callback data and just sends it back up. So it'll reestablish that graph every time if it needs to. But it's not the same as the streaming API, because the streaming API is about virtual streams, whereas these are a little bit more physical, more runtime.
So it sounds like it's better to consider it as a separate issue. It's kind of question of return enumerable, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And there are interesting reliability challenges, as you alluded to. Like, what if this guy disappears, gets collected, and subscribe, and...
Well, I think the semantics are the semantics are fairly obvious, I think. So.
Funny enough, it sounds very similar to what Midori had. They had this eventual enumerations, I think they were called at the time, where you could return a stream of values.
Asynchronously. It's kind of like Cortana, right? Where in Cortana you have standing queries that you serialize and throw up into the cloud, and Cortana says, okay, when there's a new version, wake up that thing and go send a message down to the phone or whatever the case is. So you could build systems like that as long as you can serialize the expression tree.
Yeah, that's the big problem.
Yeah, but you can do things before you can serialize the expression tree too, right? You can just have simple queries like I said, where you've programmed something in to say, okay, give me all results where they contain my name, something like that. So there's a lot of things you can do nicely with it, and I think it should be a good replacement for what we use today as grain observers. More than streamed, it's more of a grain observer replacement, I think.
Yep, that's a good point. Let's explore it. Like I said, I think the reliability and programmability around reliability is an interesting challenge. How to notify that you need to resubscribe, or how to maybe make it work magically without resubscribing, or break this enumeration.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what would happen if the client was collected in that case. It's something we'd have to explore and talk about. But it would be the same thing that happens when the, I guess, well, maybe it'd be different to what happens with grain observables. Yeah, I know it's worth thinking about. Maybe the next thing we should talk about is how we're going to prioritize these and who's going to do what, and what's the most important thing to do. What are you guys working on there from this list of things, for example?
You mean on the Redmond side, or in general?
Yeah. Redmond side, core team.
Well, the core team, the big push was put tests from VSO with all the changes and make them run without breaking, all automation and distributed tests. So that kind of 98% done. There's still like 30 tests to port and a few things to fix. Event Hub adapter for streaming, that's the big priority that Jason is focusing on, because we've been promising this code for a long time, and it happened to be much more complicated than we could imagine, the migration of this code. And then geodistribution. Geodistribution also like very immediate because we don't want this code to get stale. Like we know it works, and we just need to harden it, productize, put it in the right place. And we have already customers that are interested in trying it for the real applications.
Yeah, geodistribution I think is a killer feature as well. That's something you don't see in many arenas. And I'm sure that Sebastian has other things to do because this is a research project for him, right?
Well, funny enough, I chatted with him last week. He is interested this summer with an intern to explore something around JavaScript and Node.
Oh,
to see
okay.
how far he can get there.
Sounds
I know
good.
it is preliminary ideas.
Yeah. Oh, we've got Chakra now, so.
Yeah. Yep. Hosting that
Actually,
in
a
the
lot of
grain
this.
would be interesting. So the project last year, some guys hosted V8 inside the grain, didn't they?
Yeah, that was almost a year and a half ago.
Okay.
That was a UW intern I had. Yep. It was V8, but now there's Chakra.
Yeah. Well, probably we just want to abstract that away anyway into JS engine. We don't really care which one it is. It's a lot easier now with ECMAScript 7 as well, because they have async await support, which makes it a lot more natural looking. So we can
That was a lot of
expose
useful
all of
work,
our runtime.
Well, it makes it
Yeah.
look more like C#, right? But
Yep.
less
Yeah,
natural
you
to
can use
me.
TypeScript.
Yeah.
That was probably the biggest problem for Shanik when he worked on this. Working around lack of async await and how to wrap it in something sane.
Yeah.
Callback functions. That's all you need. We've reached the top of the hour now, so unless there's anything else we haven't covered and you want to
Hey guys, can you hear me?
We can
Yeah,
hear you
it's a
already.
bit too loud.
Oh,
Otherwise,
You're on a lousy line.
oh my God! I was trying to connect for like 50 minutes, and I was in the view mode and not like couldn't talk, and then I saw that you posted the link on Gitter.
You just came too
welcome, Gabby.
close. Good
I mean, I
comments.
was watching everything, but I had questions and some things to ask.
Shoot.
So the one question I had about the future features, which was not on your list, Sergey, is the strong guarantee for single activation. Is there a desire, like, what is, like, both from you, Sergey, and also from the community? Is there a desire for that feature? What are the plans?
I guess I mentally put it in the same bucket as reliable grain directory, which was a mistake. Of course, they have nothing to do with each other. That was my.
Gabby, you mean at most once? Is that right? At
Yes.
most one activation?
Yes.
Would that require leases?
And
It would, right?
this might be one of the implementations, yes.
Yeah. I wonder how useful that is in reality. I mean, Orleans, even though we always say it's an AP system, it does. Typical code is CP semantics, so because we push it down to storage, right? So I wonder what use cases there are for
that will
guaranteed at most once.
Yeah, so that would guarantee CP without the storage.
Yeah.
That would guarantee CP for grain, but without usage of storage. Yeah, so that's my question. Like, how is it interesting? How do we have scenarios that this was blocking someone?
We can do this with maybe group grain support and Raft implementation.
What I was thinking, yeah.
Well, on the 343 side, the benefit would be that storage calls wouldn't have to be as idempotent, or you wouldn't have to be as careful as processing requests to make sure the idempotent when it comes to storage. But then it depends on the cost, right? So if we get it for free today, why not? But of course, it will not be free.
Sure. So I think so that's just one another things that you can put on the list and based on the feedback. This could be more or less important.
Yeah, you can get it pretty easily with leases, I think, and locks. I mean, if you've got a stable cluster, then you can get that.
Nothing is easy, but it could be implemented this way. Yes, I had some design around using leases. Yes, it's not easy, but it's possible.
Yeah, it's all about corner cases. Yeah.
I always say easy. I shouldn't. I mean that it's tractable. When I say easy, I mean tractable. It's my own foolhardiness in running into things.
And then my second comment was you guys discussed deployment and YAMLs. So like that's great. I love that. And if that could be taken sort of into direction of cross cloud providers. So like if we go with Docker files, right? That means this can run. This part of the deployment story can be reused on other providers, right? Another cloud hosting. So going with the more sort of standard solutions, I love that direction.
I think that I think you're right. We need to strive for better cross-cloud platform support, because even though Orleans can run anywhere, there's a lot of providers are clearly geared towards Azure at the moment, right? I also think that it comes back to one of the first points where Sergey mentioned that we want less code, and I take that to mean we should focus on the things that are unique to Orleans. So in this case, I wonder if it would be better for us to say have all those cloud providers supported, like S3 support and things, but also make sure that YAMS itself supports those things, so that then we can just offload that requirement onto YAMS as being our deployment method of choice, for example.
Yes. Yes.
To me, I don't see a big problem here because it's kind of driven by demand, right? So re-implementing YAMS to run, say, on Linux, that wouldn't be too big of an undertaking, right? It's just code that runs and checks storage and pulls data, like checks some files. So if there is a demand for that today, that wouldn't be too hard to do.
That's not necessarily what I meant. I meant YAMS deploying like Docker files, like what you suggested. That means now something else can deploy Docker files on AWS, on Google, right? So if Orleans provides like a Docker file way to deploy it, that means Orleans is standard.
Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm all for Docker. I'm just, that's why I was asking if people use it in Docker, and then sort of what I heard back was, well, YAML seems like more immediate. So like, I view it as driven by a demand. So if there's demand for Docker, absolutely. But if people today, as of early 2016, prefer the YAMLs, which may change like in 6-12 months. So kind of follow the demand.
I think, sure. As a general comment about Docker support, I think it's a bit of a anti-pattern or a bad trend today, where we see Docker containers for every single library and framework, because in reality, you just don't need them. You need a Docker container for ASP core, for .NET Core rather, and then you should just layer your own. Like every application developer should just layer their own stuff on top of it. So in my case, I would build a Docker container which includes my Orleans silo and includes my application-specific code, and then just push that out. Because building an Orleans Docker container itself is not actually particularly useful, I think. And I don't know why it's such a popular trend these days to do that. To have, for example, hey, here's an ASP.NET Docker container. Maybe in ASP.NET's case it's a bit different, but especially for something like us, I'm not so sure.
But isn't it because of the layering that you can layer the image to kind of point to that ASP.NET as the dependency image and just layer your application code on top of it? That was explained to me, but I don't have first-hand experience.
Yeah, but I wonder how useful that is, because then it just adds an extra dimension to the way that we manage dependencies, because then you've got a Docker container with version Orleans X and other framework Y and other things Z, and then on the other axis you've got our actual project with Orleans version X, other framework Y and other things Z. So then we get this more complicated scenario than what we would otherwise have if we just had, okay, here's the base level, that's .NET, everything else is written on .NET, and we just put our own stuff on top of it. Or even lower level and just say, okay, I've just got a container, I write my own containers for all of my services, and the base image I use is just the Nano server or Arch Linux or whatever it is.
Got it.
So it's a question about utility.
Yeah, and I think it also ties into how easy it is to configure. Like if Orleans was extremely easy to configure with one line of code, for example, then having a base image for Orleans is not that useful. I think that's one of the things that we have to. If we make configuration extremely simple, then I agree maybe with Ruben that we might not need that, and we could avoid that dependency hell.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. That's probably where the desire to even have something like that stems from, is that traditionally you've got to do that configuration in the files. Maybe one-line config is easier. Like what Yevon was showing off, actually, was pretty nice.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that was very nice. I'm afraid we're taking Richard away from putting kids to bed.
Yeah, I think they're all asleep. I don't know. We've kind of reached the hour. Mm-hmm. That was extremely interesting and lots to think and talk about.
Yeah.
So thank you, Sergey, for your presentation and for all your hard work and putting up with us in the community and our rants and raves. And
thanks.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. Entertaining us.
Yeah. So I'll wrap it up if that's okay. And thanks everyone for joining. And it should appear on YouTube shortly. And I look forward to chatting to you all in Gitter soon.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Cheerio.
Thanks, Richard, for hosting.
Thank you. Cheerio.
Thanks.
Bye.